Good morning. Good morning. Welcome on this beautiful fall afternoon, or morning actually. It will be an afternoon too. I also wanted to remind you to put your phones on airplane mode or turn them off for the benefit of our friends on Zoom. Our opening hymn this morning will be in our worship and song number 331. Blessed be the tie. Please stand as you are able. Well, as you know, Phil has been sharing messages with us about the importance of maps in our lives. This prompted me to think about a road trip that Nita, Tom, and Joanne Farrington and I took about 2 years ago. But first, the backstory. Our daughter Erin had given me a book of essays by John Green, the local famous author, mostly known for his fiction works, such as The Fault in Our Stars. One of the essays was entitled, the world's largest ball of paint. So, intrigued by this story, the four of us scheduled our hour and made the road trip to Alexandria, which is located just north of Anderson, Indiana, about 75 miles from here. So here's the backstory. The world's largest ball of paint is located in the tiny town of Alexandria, Indiana. Back in 1977, Mike Carmichael painted a baseball with his 3-year-old son, and then they kept painting it. Carmichael told Roadside America, "My intention was to paint maybe 1,000 coats on it, and then maybe cut it in half and see what it looked like. But then it got to the size where it looked kind of neat, and all my family said, keep painting it." Carmichael also invited friends and family over to paint the ball, and eventually strangers started showing up, and Mike would have them paint it too. Now, over 40 years later, there are more than 26,000 layers of paint on that baseball. It weighs 2.5 tons. It has its own little house, and every year more than 1,000 strangers show up to add layers of paint to it. The whole thing is free to visit. Mike even provides the paint. He and his son both still add layers, but most of the painting is done by visitors. So, as I said, intrigued by the story, the four of us scheduled our hour and made the road trip to Alexandria. We chose our color, yellow, and then painted the giant ball of paint with rollers. The ball hangs from large chains in a heavy-duty metal frame and is several yards in diameter. We signed our names on the walls of the room, which is covered by thousands of names from all over the state, nation, and even the world, including some celebrities. And we had our photo taken with our certificates for adding layer number 27,671 to the ball of paint. I share this story because I really liked the metaphor that John Green used at the end of his essay. So maybe in the end, art and life are more like the world's largest ball of paint. You carefully choose your colors, and then you add your layer as best you can. In time, it gets painted over. The ball gets painted again and again until there is no visible remnant of your paint. And eventually, maybe nobody knows about it except for you. But that doesn't mean your layer of paint is irrelevant or a failure. You have permanently, if slightly, changed the larger sphere. You've made it more beautiful and more interesting. Each person adds a layer of his own to the ball, one that won't last, but still matters. So we build on all the work of those that came before us, and maybe you can't see it anymore. You can't see us anymore, but it's still there. So if you're in the mood for a road trip this fall, one of these beautiful fall afternoons, go on, check out the world's largest ball of paint in Alexandria, Indiana, and add your layer of paint. Okay, now it's time for our sharing. We'll start with announcements for anyone on Zoom.
This is Teresa, and I wanted to say that we are starting our Family Promise Support Week. This is the week where we provide food for those who are in the current state of homelessness in the shelter, as well as we give food to the resource center to help them stock their pantries for those who are living in cars and have other homeless conditions upon them. And I want to thank everyone for your continued support of this program. We've really are one of the founding members, and we're doing a good job of keeping in there and supporting them in this project of our community homelessness.
Anyone else on Zoom? How about here in the meeting net? Any announcements?
Since Jeff isn't here today, I'll remind folks the fall hike is October the 7th. You can still get signed up. We're going to be down in Paoli, which is my old stomping ground. So it's a pretty hike. It's, I think, an easy hike. It's Little Africa, which is where there was an African-American settlement many, many years ago. And then you'll be coming down to the farmhouse, and we'll provide lunch for everybody. And if you are unable to make the hike, you can come to the farmhouse and hang out with me, and I'll put you to work. You can stir soup. And but we hope everybody that has a slight interest will go ahead and sign up. It's a beautiful drive down, and I think we'll all have a good time. So if you're still interested, contact Jeff Gabbard. He's the keeper of the list.
I just wanted to say thank you for the donations a few weeks ago. Oh, hello? There it is. Thank you. A couple weeks ago, we asked for donations for that book vending machine. Just wanted to say thank you. Jack was the highest collection person in his grade, so his class gets a party later, so thank you all so much.
If all hearts are clear, as we pause for the offering this morning, please remember that your support helps keep the meeting an inviting, safe, and a productive place. Your donations provide for office supplies, building services, utilities, insurance, general maintenance, landscaping, and technology. Donations may be left in the offering plates, in the back, or online, as detailed on our website.
We remember the occasion, O God, when the disciples of Jesus sat with him and asked, "Teach us to pray." And, O God, we admit our own lack of understanding about prayer. We do not believe it changes your mind about us, that you were on the verge of doing something wonderful and gracious and redemptive, and only waiting for us to ask. We do not believe you withhold blessing until we sincerely seek your help. We only know that when we sit quietly, when we pause from our hectic lives and reflect and call to mind those we love and those who hurt, that we are made better for the practice. That voicing aloud that which weighs us down, expressing our gratitude for that which lifts us up, is in itself a healing act. So we pray always, O God, to make us mindful, to let us experience together the peace of shared concerns, the mutual celebration of all that uplifts us and fills us with joy. Oh God, help us to understand that prayer is not a magic formula, a tool to be used to get what we want, but rather a deep conversation with others and with you about what our world might be. Place in our hearts, O God, the will to care, to name aloud that which confounds us and that which blesses us. Place in our hearts, O God, a deep and radical concern for others, so that the news of our world does not fall on calloused, indifferent hearts, but instead takes root in fertile soil, so that our lives grow and blossom and become for this world a thing of beauty. This is our prayer on this first day morning. Amen. Well, now's the time in our meeting for worship when we look for a few strong people to pass some baskets and gather some food. Well, first I want to bring greetings from Mark and Cindy Strudelmeyer. They're in Virginia this weekend. Mark's godson is getting married, and he described the wedding as a back-to-nature wedding. They're rock climbers, and the groom proposed to the bride while hanging from the side of a cliff. And there was a hike to the ceremony, which Mark said left him exhausted. And then afterwards, there was a meal consisting of pine bark and needles. And so Mark said If I don't see you again, know that I've enjoyed my time at Fairfield and give everyone my greetings. So there you go. Well, it's been the week of travel. I was down in southern Illinois last weekend to revisit the haunts from our childhood. My siblings went with me, 2 of them, my sister and my brother Glenn. And most of the people we visited as children are now deceased, inhabiting various graveyards in Franklin County, Illinois. So much of our time was spent hobnobbing with the dearly departed. I went prepared. I downloaded an app on my phone that helped us find where our ancestors were buried, and even directions to the cemeteries, which proved helpful since several of the cemeteries we visited were very remote and small, tucked in behind defunct old country churches. Once we found the cemeteries, it was a fairly simple matter to walk up and down the short rows for a few minutes to locate our ancestors, until we arrived at the Maple Grove Cemetery just north of Cesar, Illinois, whose population is 1,800 people. Driving there, I thought, well, this will be easy. 1,800 people? The graveyard can't be that big. But when we arrived, we discovered that the Maple Grove Cemetery held 5,314 graves in 31 quarter-mile long rows, 7 3/4 miles of gravestones. So we began walking up and down the rows looking for our great-grandfather, David Petway Gulley's grave, with no initial success. Because it turns out that while the smartphone app was great at telling us the cemeteries where our ancestors were buried, it told us nothing at all about where they could be found once we arrived at the cemetery, which is kind of the crucial knowledge. We've been reflecting on the maps in our lives, be they people or paper, and the effect they continue to have on us. Today I want to talk about the limitations of maps, one of which is the limited knowledge they impart. No map can communicate everything we need to know. There is always more to learn. Our knowledge is always partial, never complete. Or as the Apostle Paul so poetically said, we see in a mirror dimly. There is always more to learn. I remember when I graduated from seminary, it was 31 years ago, telling myself, I didn't think God say this out loud to anyone, but I said it to myself quite a bit, that now I knew everything I needed to know in order to be a pastor. I was thinking this. And I was feeling very full of myself. And then a month later into my job, I found myself embroiled in the midst of this big church fight. And I had no idea what to do because they were all such nice people when they interviewed me. And then suddenly there's this big fight that I'm in the middle of, and I had no idea what to do because, as it turns out, they did not teach psychological warfare at the seminary I attended. And so I went to my superintendent in Plainfield to ask his advice about what I should do. And the superintendent, who had been in that position since God was a teenager, said, you know, Phil, the problem with that congregation is that years before, they'd had a pastor with vision problems, and they never resolved it. Vision problems? I asked him how in the world a pastor with vision problems could cause problems for a church. And he said, well, this particular minister's eyesight was so bad that one day he mistook his secretary for his wife. And that church has struggled ever since. Well, I hadn't known that. That hadn't been explained when I interviewed. I guess there's always more to learn, isn't there? The maps only get us so far. Think how often in our lives we enter circumstances and situations believing we know all we need to know to make something successful. I remember when Joanne and I first married, how no one could tell me anything about what it meant to love. We went to premarital counseling. I didn't listen to a word of it. I thought I know more about love than this man does, because I was certain no one had ever loved anyone as deeply and perfectly as I loved Joanne. We'd been married maybe a month or two, and up until then, things had been going great. She'd say, I love you. I'd say, I love you more. And she'd say, no, I love you more. You remember those days. But then one day I did something stupid, really dumb. And Joanne looked at me, and in that moment I knew immediately what she was thinking. She was thinking how nice it would be to be single. Now, she didn't say it, but I could tell she was thinking it. And that's when I realized that I had more things to learn. There's always something more we must know. So there we were last weekend down at the Maple Grove Cemetery, looking for my great-grandfather's tombstone, David Petway Gulley. We had maybe looked at 4,000 tombstones in the hours that we'd been there, and by then I was really starting to dislike this man. I was wishing he'd been cremated and they'd thrown his ashes in a creek somewhere. But we kept looking, and my brother Glenn finally found him right there underneath a tree alongside my great-grandmother, Leona Eccles Gulley, who, from what I had always been told, was a genuine piece of work. But there they were, my great-grandparents. We looked at their gravestone for a while, and then we left the cemetery and went to visit a second cousin that we hadn't seen in probably 50 years, since we were little kids. And this cousin is the family historian. She kind of fulfills that role in our family. We didn't tell her we were coming. We just showed up on her doorstep, all four of us. She didn't recognize us at first. She opened the door and looked at us. And so I asked if we could come in and talk with her about Jesus. But then she recognized my sister, and she threw up her arms and said, "Oh, my cousins," and welcomed us in and was so happy to see us. She lives in the very house my great-grandfather, David Petway Gulley, built back in the early 1900s. And she told us, as we were seated in her living room, all of the family secrets, which was just fascinating. Things my parents never talked about because they didn't think we could take it. There were stories about the deaths of little children in the family and the broken marriages, which I knew nothing about, and even the decline into alcoholism of so many of my ancestors. And as she was talking about this, listening to her, I thought of my own father's struggle with alcohol and how angry that had made me over the years. When my father was alive, I never tried to understand his alcoholism. I just got angry about it and thought the solution was simple. He drank too much, needed to stop. But then listening to our family historian, I realized it wasn't simple at all, that the roots of that sickness ran deep in our genes. I thought I had known all there was to know about my family. But there's always something more to learn. Isn't it funny how often we set down the shovel because we think the hole is dug when we barely just scratched the surface? There's always something more to learn, some work that lies unfinished. It was the Catholic sister, Joan Chittister, who wrote, "In our dreams lies our unfinished work for the world." In our dreams lies our unfinished work for the world. There is always something more to learn, something more to understand, something more to which we can aspire. In our dreams lies our unfinished work for the world. There is always, always, always something more to understand and learn. A Quaker query. Am I careful to see the full picture, the true picture of others, especially those who I find difficult to love? Am I careful to see the full picture, the true picture of others, especially those who I find difficult to love?
Our closing hymn this morning is in the worship and song number 260, Here I Am, Lord. Please stand as you are able.
song. Well, Mike Goss emailed me on Thursday, wanting to know if I could go on a motorcycle ride yesterday. He had heard of a bar in northern Vigo County out in the country that served wonderful food. And so off we went, driving on the back roads all the way over to Vigo County, and we walked into this bar, and there were only 2 other diners there, and it was a very pleasant place. And we no sooner had gotten our food than we heard the roar of engines, and about 70 all-terrain vehicles pulled up in the parking lot and came in, and I thought, oh my Lord, we have been taken over. I thought nothing good will come of this moment. And a lady came up to me and Mike and started talking with us. We joined the conversation midway through. It seemed to be one of these moments where when you walk into a conversation, and it felt like she had been having the conversation with someone else and finally carried it over to us. And so she began talking, and what she talked about was life in a small town and community. And she was describing how much she enjoyed living in a small Indiana town where she knew people, where she knew they loved her, and she knew that she loved them. And when she walked in and the others walked in, I was not expecting a conversation like that. We never know what we need to hear, and we never know who will end up teaching us what we need to know. What she described is precisely what I experience here. The love of people who know me. And that is a precious thing. And I wasn't anticipating that when they walked in the room. I was expecting Trumpism in full blooming. And instead, I learned this marvelous lesson about how good it is to be in a place where you are known and loved, and how that transcends everything. It transcends everything. So we never know what it is we need to learn. So this week, friends, learn. And learn especially from those you think have nothing to teach you, because they are often the ones God raises up to be our instructors. Turn and greet, friends.